All right, before we get into Murder in the Black for today, I just have to mention that I feel like Tyler, I feel like you gonna try to do Murder in the Black.
Tyler Perry?
I mean, you got Beauty in the Black,
Divorce in the Black?
Murder in the Black.
Now we're going to do Murder in the Black. And we just saying, listen, if you're going to do Murder in the Black, because it seems like a natural progression. Beauty in the Black, or it started with Divorce in the Black, Beauty in the Black. I feel like the natural progression is Murder in the Black. And if you do, Tyler Perry, hit
Send
your
us
girls up.
We would love it. I mean, I love Atlanta.
And so we also are asking all of you who also love us.
Right.
To hit Tyler Perry up in the comments. At him. At Tyler Perry. Let him know.
Murder in the Black is already a podcast. We're doing God's work.
We're willing to work with you.
Right.
That's all we're saying.
That's all we just gonna put that out there in the atmosphere. All right. Clock that too. Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph.
And I'm MD.
Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, and your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it.
This is the case of Lita McClinton. I've entitled this case, Beneath the Pink Roses. The doorbell rang on a brisk morning in Atlanta. Lita McClinton tightened her robe before heading downstairs to answer the door. Initially hesitant, she looked through the peephole and saw a man standing at the door with a long white box of roses adorned with a large, thick pink ribbon. Excitedly, she assumed it was a delivery from one of her friends. Lita lived in a row of red brick townhouses, and her white one stood out among the others. Her best friend, Poppy, and Poppy's 3-year-old daughter had spent the night and were still asleep upstairs. As Lita greeted the man with a cheerful, "Good morning," the flower delivery man suddenly produced a handgun and fired. In a moment of panic, Lita instinctively raised the box of roses to shield her face. The second shot struck her directly in the center of her head, and she collapsed with a heavy thud. Poppy, who was upstairs with her toddler, quickly reacted by grabbing her daughter and hiding her in a closet, whispering for her to be as quiet as a mouse. She could only wonder if the gunman would come after them next. Meanwhile, a neighbor heard the gunshots and witnessed the assailant fleeing the scene at high speed. He wasted no time calling 911. The first police officer was only a few blocks away when he received the call about the shooting. He rushed to the scene and found Lita, who was thought to be completely unconscious. Yet to everyone's surprise, she managed to squeeze his hand while he comforted her, telling her that everything would be okay. He later remarked that it was as if she was comforting him in that moment. Meanwhile, Poppy emerged from the closet and quickly called Lita's mother, struggling to find the words. When she finally spoke, all she could manage to say was, "Lita's been shot." Lita's mother then called her husband, and when they arrived at the hospital, they were placed in a small waiting room while the doctor attended to Lita. About 30 minutes later, the doctor came out and delivered the heartbreaking news. He was sorry. Lita had passed.
Lita had a magnetic personality and drew people to her. She was a cherished friend and a kind soul. Her parents were devastated by the news. They could not fathom how they would cope with her loss, expressing it should have been us, not her. The exclusive Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta, known for its sprawling mansions, was not accustomed to such violence. And when the shooting occurred, neighbors were left in shock and fear. Lita was found in the doorway of her townhouse, having been shot twice in the head. This type of incident was startling for the area, where such events were thought to be unlikely. Detectives at the crime scene recovered a bullet fragment, 2 shell casings, and the box of now pink roses that had been delivered to Lita. The gunshots fired from a 9mm weapon had penetrated the box, yet the weapon itself was never found and remains missing to this day. At that time, the evidence was minimal, and the case quickly became a top story in the news. Law enforcement faced immense pressure to solve the case, but for years, Lita's murder remained cold, buried beneath a plethora of unanswered questions. This true crime story delves much deeper, exploring themes of love, loss, and greed within Atlanta's Black elite. Black women have historically needed to excel to gain recognition, a reality that was true then and remains true today. One thing is certain, a murder of this nature is profoundly personal. From the onset, police suspected that the murder was calculated. It was clear that Lita McClinton was the intended target. There was no robbery involved. Someone had knocked on her door, presented roses, only to shoot her dead.
Georgia in the 1970s was a vastly different place than the Georgia that we know today, specifically Atlanta. It was still emerging from the dark shadows of segregation and racial tensions. During this transformative time, prominent African Americans were rising to influential positions. Lita was a part of this ascent, largely due to her parents, Emory and Joanne McClinton, who were key players in the city's progressive movement. Emory served on the State Board of Transportation, and Joanne was a member of the Georgia legislature. She often recounts her close encounters with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and played a pivotal role as Maynard Jackson's campaign manager in his run for mayor. With such backgrounds, the McClintons held high expectations for their daughter, envisioning a bright future for her. Now, we're going to take a second and just go into Black elite, and that is pertaining to Atlanta, but the Black elite can go in any city, right? There's an influential sector of people that involve themselves in what is dubbed as the Black elite. Now, the term Black elite in Atlanta often refers to individuals and families who have historically held positions of influence and privilege within the African American community. This elite class has its roots in the post-Civil War era, following the establishment of historically Black colleges and universities in the city. Atlanta has become a prominent center for Black culture, politics, and education, heavily shaped by its history and demographics.
Historically, HBCUs have played a significant role in shaping the social and cultural fabric of Atlanta, particularly in the development of the Black elite. The Atlanta University Center, the AUC, consists of several institutions, including Morehouse College, Spelman College, Clark Atlanta University, and Morris Brown College, all serving as vital educational foundations. Let's talk a little bit about some of the top HBCUs in Atlanta. Morehouse College was established in 1867. Morehouse is renowned for producing prominent Black leaders, including civil rights icon Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Spelman College, which is the sister college to Morehouse, was founded in 1881. Spelman is recognized as one of the leading women's colleges in the nation, particularly among African American institutions. Clark Atlanta University, formed through the merger of Atlanta University and Clark College in 1988, this institution has historically offered graduate degrees to African Americans and has contributed significantly to the cultural and intellectual life of the community. HBCUs not only provide educational opportunities, but it also serves as a networking hub for fostering connections among elite families and individuals within the African American community. They have historically promoted leadership, cultural pride, and social activism.
When we talk about the Black elite, I'm just going to keep tallies as we're speaking. It includes position of affluence. And naturally, within our country, in order to obtain some type of influence, not always, it's education, right? And so we had to establish HBCUs for a time where we could only get into those universities, kind of like FUBU, for us, by us. And this plays a role in the Black elite. We're going to talk a little bit about Jack and Jill. Now, Jack and Jill of America was founded in 1938. It's an organization for African American mothers and their children focusing on leadership and development. The organization aims to strengthen the bonds between families while providing children exposure to social and cultural experiences that prepare them for future leadership roles. They have a debutante program. Jack and Jill host a debutante program, which is a rite of passage for young Black women in the elite community. The program emphasizes social etiquette, community service, and cultural appreciation, preparing young women to navigate societal expectations as they enter adulthood. The significance in Atlanta is in the 1970s, the organization saw a resurgence as Black middle-class families moved into the suburbs, transitioning its mission from assimilation to instilling ethnic pride. This transformation was part of a broader movement among elite Black families to celebrate and promote their heritage. And if we're talking about the 1970s, then we're right in the pocket of when Lita grew up.
The elite Black community in Atlanta maintains certain attitudes that reflect both accomplishment and aspirations, which is good, but these can also foster divisions. Many have an ingrained belief in the necessity of education, professional achievement, and financial success as paths to uplift not only themselves, but the entire community. Now, this often manifests in a strong emphasis on academic excellence and leadership through established institutions like HBCUs. There is a deep sense of pride in their culture and history, coupled with a strong encouragement for social and community involvement, like organizations like Steph talked about, Jack and Jill, which help to reinforce this pride by celebrating African American culture and fostering connections among members.
MD covered the pros about the Black elite, especially in Atlanta during this time, but we also have to cover how this can make others inside of the Black community feel left out. Despite the positive aspects, there is a notable element of elitism within the community, leading to feelings of superiority over those perceived as less successful. This attitude can create divides within the Black community, as some may feel marginalized or excluded based on their social status and education or their economics. We gave you guys a quick fact sheet about the Black elite in Atlanta during the time of the 1970s, but be clear, this still goes on today. I want you to kind of cover how sororities and fraternities are enmeshed within the Black elite experience. And then I just want to ask you your overall opinion about what do you think about Black elitism or Black excellence as we now call it.
Right. Black sororities and fraternities are ingrained in that whole HBCU culture, as a result of not being accepted into the fraternities and sororities that were around back when we started to go to college. We established our own. Alpha Phi Alpha was established in 1906, followed by AKA, which was established in 1908. And, we can go on with Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta, the Sigmas, Phi Beta Sigma, Omega Psi Phi, and I digress. It's so many. And all of these organizations were created similar to like the Jack and Jill experience, which is to reinforce the pride of being an African American and the culture and fostering these connections amongst, one another, so that we feel like we have this sense of belonging within the broader culture that does exist as an American, an American at a college or university. I think that it's great. Like they offer so many wonderful opportunities, networking opportunities. I am a member of Zeta Phi Beta. One of the things that I always say is that while on campus, while I was going through my 4 years of school, of undergrad, you were segmented into I'm a Zeta, you're an AKA, you're a Delta. But when you graduate, it's just you're Greek. And, it's a commonality that when I'm being hired and I find out, I look behind me and I see that they're a part of the, Divine Nine, I'm like, hey, like I'm a Zeta, it gives this commonality. And then we know we have this shared experience of we were in a Greek organization and now I'm more likely to maybe hire you, not just hire you, but try to push you and and allow you to experience growth and success. So it is a means of us being able to have hierarchy within companies and organizations that we otherwise may not have experienced. It's basically the proverbial, good old white boy system, but for Black people. Jack and Jill is, these Divine Nine organizations are. It's basically, I need to be able to have access, and if I have someone who has shared experience with me, I know that if you were in a Divine Nine organization, I know that you have a certain level of structure. I know you learned certain things that you wouldn't have learned if you weren't in this organization. I'm now going to look at you as being better than other people that were not in it, and I'm going to give you access that you otherwise would not have. Now, your second question, which was just like, what do I think? How do I think this can be divisive? And I definitely think that whenever you have subgroups within the larger group, you always have a situation where you're leaving people out, where people feel excluded and they feel like they're not a part of. And whether that is to be an intentionally negative thing, like nobody created Alpha Phi Alpha or, to exclude other African American men who they thought were not worthy. That was not the purpose of its creation. But by its very nature of being a subgroup, that's what happens. I think when you have these organizations like Jack and Jill and the Divine Nine and just anything where it's like, oh, we are the Black elite. We are the ones we're the chosen people. We're the ones that speak to the greater good of who we are. If you're not a Black elite, then you're subpar. You're not worthy. And even though that may not have been the intention of creation, I think it just naturally happens. And you have to be very careful when you create subgroups inside the larger group.
I agree. I definitely think that this speaks to a larger argument that has taken place inside of the Black community for quite some time. We have a lot of scholars, and one of them is W.E.B. Du Bois, who went to Fisk University, and he had an idea called the talented 10th. And the talented 10th speaks to this Black elite that we are talking about. And his whole premise was the talented 10th, the people who are to receive the education and be a part of these groups and are able to assimilate into society, are to then bring up the others inside of the community, the Black community. And that was a really harsh critique for some. One of them being Booker T. Washington, who established Tuskegee University. And one of the things that he spoke to was really a collective nature. Yeah, you have people who are educated, right? And who go to school. And he actually created one of those historically Black colleges and universities that we speak of. But he talks about coming together to uplift one another. There was these different schools of thought that were permeating the culture, and that continues to be a topic of some contention or just a good debate to talk about how we can uplift one another. But all in all, I think regardless of where you land on this argument, I think we all can agree that we need to uplift each other regardless.
Amen. I think that's accurate. Well, I think we should get back to our story. Lita was a true daughter of Atlanta. Her charm and elegance made her a gem in her community. Growing up within the world of cotillions, she epitomized the classic upper crust Black experience in Atlanta that Steph and I divulged with you. Boasting of keen sense of style and a clear vision for her future, she was a BAPS. Right, Stephen, what can you tell our audience, what is a BAPS?
BAPS is a Black American princess. One of them is, obviously, you're going to think of the movie BAPS by Robert Townsend. But if you watch Saved by the Bell, Lisa was a BAPS.
She was a BAPS.
She was privileged.
And that's basically what Lita was. And after graduating high school, she continued her education at Spelman College, where her parents hoped she would follow in their political footsteps. However, Lita was captivated by fashion, working at a boutique in Lenox Square. It was there that she first encountered James Jim Sullivan, a man with unruly curls and thick glasses who was immediately taken with Lita. At 35, He was a bit older than the fresh college graduate, and he showered her with gifts and attention, and he dazzled her with his charm. Lita was just 24 years old at the time, so she was smitten. Thus, she began this whirlwind romance that would ultimately lead to her tragedy.
Jim saw Lita as a fantasy, envisioning her as a young, attractive, and intelligent African-American woman. A significant difference between them was their social class. Lita was raised in Atlanta's high society, while Jim grew up in the gritty south side of Boston, and Jim was white. He grew up in a middle to lower middle class environment. He pursued higher education at Holy Cross College, where he earned a bachelor's degree in economics. He always was aspiring for a wealthier life. Much like our other case that we covered with Emma, go back and listen to that, she was always aspiring for something new. Despite his hard work as an accountant, he felt stuck and believed financial success was not in his future. However, everything changed for Jim Sullivan when he inherited a flourishing liquor distributorship, Crown Beverages, worth approximately $3.2 million, making him a wealthy man that he always wanted to be. When the McClinton family met Jim for the first time, they were taken aback by his brash demeanor and wondered what their daughter saw in him. The only commonality seemed to be their shared Catholic faith, but otherwise they were polar opposites. Race was also a significant concern. Even in the 1970s, despite some progress in breaking down color barriers, interracial relationships were still viewed with a lot of skepticism. Georgia's anti-miscegenation laws, which prohibited marriages between Black and white individuals, had only been repealed years earlier, which should give all of you a good picture on how this was an uphill battle for her to marry this white man during this time in the Deep South. Despite their evident differences, Jim Sullivan proposed to Lita. The McClinton family strongly disapproved, believing that Lita was making a grave mistake and was swept up in the excitement of the relationship. I want to stop and talk about, do you as a parent, because we're both parents, MD, do you as a parent, when you see your child about to marry somebody as Lita was about to get married, do you tell your child before they get married, hey, listen, red flag, no, I don't think you should marry this person? Or should you put it to the side knowing that they're adults and they're going to do whatever they want anyway?
It's a combination of both. You do, let them do whatever they want. But I think as a parent, it's our job, no matter how old they get, to give them counsel, right? Hey, I'm noticing some things and I want you to be aware of the things that I'm noticing while I understand. It's not going into it like, this is what you should do. And I'm telling you like you're a kid, but coming at them like, I know you're grown. I know you've considered this. I know you're not going in this blindly, but I want to share with you some of the things that I have noticed as I've observed your relationship. And I hope that you will consider these things as you make this decision. It's one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make in your life. And I don't want you to make it lightly. And I wanted to give my counsel. That's how I would approach it, because ultimately they are grown and they are going to make their own decision. And if they do choose to make the decision that's contrary to what you think they should do, then you have to get behind them and not necessarily, quote unquote, to support them, but allow them to make that decision.
That's exactly what the McClinton family did. Her parents told her their concerns. She decided to marry Jim anyway. They became engaged. However, on the eve of their wedding, Jim revealed another shocking truth. He had been married before and had 4 children. Lita was completely blindsided by this revelation. The same evening, Jim handed her a piece of paper asking her to sign a prenup. I mean, the unmitigated gall.
The audacity. I mean, are they handing it out for free?
I mean, seriously.
I mean, because really, she doesn't even need your money. She comes from money. She very much is the definition of money and riches. So she doesn't even need your money. Why do you think she would be trying to steal? Why do you think she's marrying you for your money? Because that's basically what a prenup is. Just in case you were marrying me just to get my money, I want to make sure that I can protect my assets, right? Yeah. No, I'm not trying to get your money.
Right. She looked at the document and it revealed that if they were to have a divorce, she would receive nothing. Reluctant, yet pressured by circumstances, it was time for a wedding. It was the day before She signed the agreement and proceeded with the wedding.
Lita married Jim in 1976 during a small ceremony in Macon, Georgia. Joanne McClinton later described that day as the worst day of her life. The newlyweds settled about 80 miles south of Atlanta near Jim's business in Macon. This new life was a stark contrast to Atlanta, and Lita agreed to give up her job and income to become a full-time wife. You want me to sign this prenup agreement where I'm going to get virtually nothing in the divorce, but during my marriage, I also have to give up my career, my life, and all my money.
My livelihood in the event that we are to divorce.
So you're just making sure that I'm going to be
a brokey. Okay.
Destitute. Okay. Jim Sullivan and Lita purchased a house in Shirley Hills, an affluent suburb predominantly occupied by white residents. During the 1970s in Macon, Georgia, the societal norms posed significant challenges for interracial couples. Joanne and Emery McClinton were particularly concerned for their daughter, who was in this interracial relationship, fearing the community's reactions. Neighbors expressed their disapproval, demonstrating their prejudice by throwing garbage on the couple's doorstep and just treating them overtly racist. Facing such overt racism had to be incredibly difficult for Lita. However, she persevered and eventually forged new friendships, including one with Yvette Miller. Occasionally, when Lita and Yvette would dine together at upscale restaurants, Lita noticed something unusual. Despite both being from affluent backgrounds, there were moments when Lita would be unable to pay the bill, leading Yvette to cover the cost. This dynamic created a sense of oddity, particularly given their financial standing. Initially, the first few months of Jim and Lita's marriage appeared promising. They were both intelligent, attractive, and seemed to embody the characteristics of upper-class society. However, beneath the surface, cracks began to show.
Jim's demeanor shifted. He was not always kind or supportive to Lita. Friends observed a transformation in Jim, who once was a generous millionaire but had become increasingly miserly. He began to exhibit peculiar fragility, such as wearing his deceased uncle's clothing at home and repurposing dry cleaning sheets as plastic wraps in the kitchen. Sir, listen.
We're not going to act like we're not a millionaire.
I'm all for being frugal, but we're not going to do that.
We're not going to act like we don't have all the money.
Go buy
saran wrap
at the dollar store if you just are so concerned. And this was the 70s, which is even further pissing me off because I know how much cost of living was.
If you I'm like, saran wrap, well, I don't know how much it costs right now because I have not purchased saran wrap recently, and it probably is like $4.
$5.
But see, there you go. But back when the economy was decent, saran wrap was like $1. We're not going to sit up here and act like so if saran wrap was $1 in the 2000s, you better believe that in 1970 it was 69. No, it was 10 cents. It was probably 10 freaking cents.
Not 10. Just goes to show y'all how he was Mr. Scrooge. Although he discouraged Lita from working, he imposed a strict weekly allowance of $150. Which explains why she would go out to eat at these nice restaurants and not have enough to cover her and her friend's meal. Makes sense. Lita often voiced her dissatisfaction with her marriage when she was with her friends, lamenting that her husband did not provide for her sufficient financial resources to take care of herself. This discontent was compounded by whispers of infidelity. Lita frequently questioned whether her husband was having an affair. One day, she discovered a long blonde hair in their master bathroom, prompting her to confront him about it. His dismissive response of, "I don't know what you're talking about," led them into a reoccurring cycle of accusation, denials, and subsequent apologies, often in the form of expensive jewelry gifts from Jim to Lita. And I can only imagine how Lita was feeling because here you have at the very top of your marriage, your parents telling you, "Hey, I don't think this is it." Then right before you get married, he tells you, "Oh, by the way, P.S., I have 4 kids. I was married." And then he does all these various things to make you miserable. Outside of her friendships, I doubt that she told her parents what was truly going on, which just had to be miserable.
For sure. And then you have this standard, right, that you're trying to live up to. Not just, I'm trying, as women, we always are wondering if, our spouse or whatever is interested in someone younger, interested in some, right? Like we're always competing against that. Or I don't want to say always, but that's something that can be clear in marriages or even in relationships. But she's also competing against, like, I'm Black and he's white and he was once married and he has 4 white kids. Like, does he still want a white woman? And, oh, I found this blonde hair that obviously is not mine. It's not even like you can pretend like it's not. Like, I don't have blonde hair. Make it make sense.
I mean, it's things that we have to deal with as women, right? During the holiday season, Lita made another discovery amongst all the other infidelity whispers that she was hearing and saw in her household. A Christmas card addressed to Jim arrived in their home, which she opened to find a message from another woman expressing sentiments such as missing your kisses. The message lacked an envelope, compelling Lita to confront the woman directly, who confessed to having an affair with Jim. Devastated, Lita returned to her parents' home in Atlanta for support. However, Jim ultimately managed to lure her back by significantly increasing her weekly allowance from $150 to $300 and proposing a post-nuptial agreement, which stipulated that all their assets belonged solely to him. Even though he would gift her with a lot of these things and change something in their post-nuptial agreement, which presumably made it more fair. I think it was alimony that he added, but he still owned everything. Everything was still in his name. Sullivan decided to sell Crown Beverages for $5 million and informed Lita that they would be relocating to Palm Beach, Florida. Lita was taken aback by this news. She never anticipated that he would take her to Palm Beach. Their new home, Casa Alita, was far more extravagant than she could have ever imagined. This impressive 17,000 square foot mansion boasted 8 oceanfront bedrooms and provided an unforgettable experience. To reach the property's private beach, one would enter through a tunnel that opened directly to the shore.
I mean, this is a bad house, obviously. James Sullivan's ambition to integrate into the upper echelon of society did not align with his marriage to Lita. Palm Beach was an unwelcoming place for a Black woman, and Sullivan soon realized that having a Black wife was a significant impediment to achieving the social status he desired. Despite their wealth, the social stratification in Palm Beach rendered their riches insignificant compared to the substantial fortunes of other residents. You may have millions. You may have 5 millions, but these people got 10 millions and billions.
I mean, it's levels.
It's levels to this, and you're not at the highest.
Right. Speaking to our friends, we say stuff, oh, he's rich. But what does that really mean? Let's break down rich.
You have to have a definition. Even within your definition of rich, then there's going to be levels, and he was not at that level. Lita felt increasingly marginalized as she was excluded from various social events, and this led to significant distress. Sullivan's quest for acceptance among the rich and famous of Palm Beach drove him to seek, dun dun dun, new relationships. His pursuit of social status led him to flirt with other women, which, let's just be honest, he was already doing while he was in Atlanta. And it was at a cocktail party that he became captivated by Suki Rogers, a Korean-born socialite known for her telegenic appearance and approachable personality. Intrigued by Suki's beauty, that exotic look, Sullivan began dating her despite still being married to Lita. By this time, Sullivan and Lita had been married for nearly 10 years, but Sullivan's actions clearly showed his disregard for their marriage vows in pursuit of his social ambition. Lita and Jim Sullivan's decade-long marriage was about to reach a breaking point. The final incident that triggered Lita's decision to leave was discovering women's lingerie on their master bed sheets, confirming her suspicions of infidelity and total disregard and disrespect of their marriage bed. Seriously. Feeling completely disillusioned, Lita decided she had endured enough. Okay? I'm done. She announced, I'm done. just like we said, and began packing her belongings, determined to move back to her family in Atlanta and really just reclaim her life, because he, at this point, has stolen some of the best years of her life, okay? All her 20s, and now she's in her mid-30s. The very next day, Lita formally filed for divorce from Jim Sullivan. She was playing no games. I'm back in Atlanta. I'm back home, because when we're done, and I know some of y'all don't listen to his music no more, but I mean, it is on point for this moment. When a woman's fed up, there's nothing you can do about it. Now, however, the divorce was anything but straightforward, as you can imagine. Jim Sullivan fought her every step of the way, and he caused the process to drag on and on and on, because a divorce that's amicable can happen quickly, even when there's lots of assets to split. But a divorce that is not amicable can be drawn out for decades.
Dang, you said decades. I'm concerned. Despite the challenges of the divorce, Lita was optimistic about her new beginning. She had cut ties with Jim and was eager to reclaim her life. Her outlook on starting over was refreshing, even though she faced the significant challenge of transitioning from a luxurious lifestyle in Palm Beach, complete with a mansion, to creating a new life without a career or any money. This transition raises a critical societal issue: the notion that money cannot buy happiness. According to her friends, Lita was actually relieved to be free from her contentious and stressful relationship with Jim. Despite the material comforts she was leaving behind, she chose to return to her townhouse in Buckhead, Atlanta. I think this also is like a nod to what existed back in that day, back in the 1990s, but also just how it's portrayed now with social media. You think everybody is doing great and, oh my gosh, I just want to be a part of their life. And then you have a situation like Lita's where, yeah, she's living a good life somewhat, but she's miserable. She's miserable. So starting over from scratch, yes, in her mid-30s, was more attractive than staying married to a man who treated her like garbage. Lita was awarded $2,500 a month in alimony for 3 years, which provided some financial support. However, she was determined to fight for a more substantial settlement, believing she deserved a fair share to move on with her life. Lita's goals in divorce court were to secure a reasonable financial settlement to ensure her new life could be sustained. Lita faced numerous challenges, including the division of assets that Jim Sullivan controlled almost entirely. Despite the obstacles, she stood firm, focusing on what she believed she deserved, and endeavored to fight for her rights throughout the divorce proceedings. January 16, 1987 was set to be a pivotal day in the lives of Lita and Jim Sullivan. On that day, a judge was scheduled to decide whether to nullify their postnuptial agreement. If the agreement was thrown out, Lita stood to gain nearly $1 million in cash and assets. Tragically, Lita would lose her life that same morning. And with her murder, Jim Sullivan stood to retain control over their property and his money. Initially, Sullivan was the main suspect, but attention shifted when investigators uncovered a secret recording of Lita's private conversations.
Marvin, the husband of Lita's friend Maribel, were going through a difficult period in their marriage, and he began recording Lita and Maribel's phone conversations without their knowledge. He suspected that these conversations might reveal valuable information and inform Jim about the recordings. Jim encouraged Marvin to continue, hoping to find incriminating evidence that could be used in the divorce proceeding with Lita. When Lita and Maribel discovered that Marvin was eavesdropping on their conversations, Maribel filed for divorce and Lita pressed charges against Marvin for eavesdropping. Investigators had to assess whether Marvin, who now had a motive due to these charges, was involved in Lita's murder. Despite Marvin's resentment towards Lita for pressing charges, there was simply no evidence implicating him in her death. Marvin later commented, "Black people get wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and so the only saving grace is the fact that I knew I was innocent." Sir, you were not innocent of eavesdropping on these conversations.
Marvin, okay, so you didn't murder her, but your only conviction was that you were innocent? Marvin, you're creepy.
He was placed on probation for the eavesdropping charges, and he completed it and was eventually exonerated. The secret recordings Marvin made did reveal discussions Lita had about other men, which her soon-to-be ex-husband pointed out to the police. Like, it wasn't me, it was these other dudes.
Not you about to say these other. Okay.
It was these other dudes that she was dating.
That's probably what he said.
That's probably exactly what he said. And he was saying it with a hard R. Sullivan alleged that Lita was involved in extramarital affairs, suggesting that a disgruntled boyfriend might have been responsible for her murder. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, Lita's family held a funeral 3 days later. However, months passed with no closer identification of her murderer, causing the case to grow increasingly cold. Investigators initially questioned various suspects, including a professional athlete who was friends with Lita in Palm Beach. However, they quickly determined that this individual was in prison for drug possession at the time of her murder, effectively eliminating him as a suspect. I tell you, there is no greater alibi than you being in the prison.
Yeah. Be in prison.
I was not there, sir. I was serving time.
And you can backlog it. You can go look at it. All that you need to do, okay? Despite the range of suspects and early speculation, solid evidence identifying Lita's murderer was slow to surface, causing the case to remain unsolved for an extended period of time. Authorities then shifted their focus to a prominent Atlanta businessman who had been childhood friends with Lita. Although their friendship was rekindled around the time of her murder, the investigation revealed he had no motive and no connection to the crime. Furthermore, authorities scrutinized Bob Daniel, another suitor who had taken Lita to dinner the night before her death and had also given her 2 roses. Bob had previously been involved in a concerning incident where, in a drunken rage, he smashed his car into Lita's garage and threatened to kill someone as the police arrested him. Lita, I'm concerned. These little creepy men around you, girl. Despite this red flag, the lead did not yield any results as Bob had recently undergone quadruple bypass surgery, making it unlikely that he was physically capable of committing the murder.
I mean, I think that's probably the second best.
That's the second.
In jail, I had a quadruple bypass surgery.
So you're physically, if you get your heart rate up, sir, you might have another heart attack or something. The inability to conclusively identify the murderer led to frustration and anguish for Lita's parents, the McClintons, who were determined to seek justice for their daughter. To this end, they offered $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and the conviction of those responsible for Lita's murder. While the early investigation was mired in numerous leads and suspects, no conclusive evidence linked any of them directly to Lita's murder. The Atlanta Police Department assigned 2 veteran detectives, Lieutenant Walker and Detective Harris, to investigate the murder of Lita Sullivan. They characterized the case as one of high society, noting that it encompassed a wide range of elements. Most of the detectives' work involved engaging directly with the community. It was boots to the ground. I know I say that often, and I really say that when it comes to canvassing an area, but think about it, the 80s, early 90s, they couldn't rely on cell phone towers because they just weren't there. They relied on seeking the public's help. Lita was shot with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, and one of the most significant pieces of evidence discovered at the crime scene was the box of roses. Detectives canvassed local flower shops and quickly found that the roses had been purchased from Botany Bay Flower Shop.
When they interviewed the florist, they learned that a man had come into the shop around 8 a.m. that day, purchased the roses, paid in cash, and then left in a small car. The florist provided a description of the man and noted that another individual was waiting in the vehicle. This indicated to detectives that they were searching for at least 2 men. As the investigation progressed, another witness came forward with a description of the flower delivery man, the neighbor across the street from Lita. Bob Christensen described the delivery man as a Caucasian, middle-aged male. He collaborated with police artists to create sketches of the suspect. As the sketches were completed, officers began to realize that the shooter was clearly not Jim Sullivan, Lita's husband. Over time, it became evident that the 3 individuals involved in the case appeared distinctly different from one another. This realization underscored the complexity of the investigation, confirming that multiple people were likely implicated in Lita Sullivan's murder. The circumstances around Lita's murder displayed clear signs of a murder-for-hire scheme. Evidence indicates that a hitman posed as a flower delivery person gained access to her home, fired a gunshot before fleeing the scene. Investigators were now examining the possibility that Lita was indeed killed by a hired gunman. A critical piece of evidence that emerged during the investigation was a mysterious phone call that was placed about an hour after the shooting. This collect call originated from a payphone located outside of Atlanta, Georgia. As the investigation continued, it was apparent that no suspects had been named. The murder weapon remained unidentified, and there were no documented evidence that linked Jim Sullivan, or anyone else for that matter, to the murder. However, this situation poised to change with the retrieval of Jim Sullivan's phone records from the day that Lita was murdered. Notably, approximately 1 hour after the shooting, a collect call was made to Sullivan's residence in Palm Beach, Florida. This call was traced back to a rest stop in Suwanee, Georgia, roughly 30 to 40 miles from Lita's home, which opened up the potential for federal jurisdiction in this case due to the interstate nature of the call.
And by that, we mean the FBI, because now we're crossing state lines. Authorities, including Special Agent John Kingston, believed that the call from Suwanee to Sullivan's home may provide vital insight, suggesting that a contract killer contacted him shortly after committing the murder. Kingston took a particular interest in the phone call alongside a range of other calls Jim Sullivan made and received around the time of Lita's murder, spanning from 6 months before the murder to 6 months after. In his investigation, Kingston learned from Lita's neighbor, Bond Christensen, which, may I add, he is like the perfect nosy neighbor.
I'm here for Bob.
I'm here for Bob.
Bob, it is because of you. All heroes don't wear capes. And in this situation, the hero is the nosy neighbor.
Right. They don't make no awards for that, Bob. Sullivan called Bob Christensen 3 days prior to the murder. During their conversation, Jim inquired whether Bob had noticed anything suspicious around Lita's townhouse, which Bob found unsettling given that he had not spoken to Jim in over a year. Like, why are you calling me?
Like, why are you calling me and you not with this woman no more? So why do you want to know if there's something?
Be suspicious.
Be
like,
suspicious.
You're
you are
suspicious.
Red flag, sir.
Additionally, on the same day Jim called Bob, Lita experienced a loud knock on her door early in the morning, which she ignored. This incident further heightened Bob's suspicions about Jim's intentions in calling him up. Agent Kingston also discovered a phone call made between Jim's residence and a Howard Johnson motel located just a few miles away from Lita's home. This was particularly intriguing as Kingston noted that Jim Sullivan, a millionaire, was not the type to frequent motels. Seeking further information, he visited the Howard Johnson Motel and requested to examine their records. To his surprise, the hotel staff provided him with a shoebox filled with registration cards because, yes, during that time, it was not digital, they didn't have the computer, and it was a box of cards, and you had to write down what you were checking into and sign your name.
Let's go, old school.
Kingston selected 3 cards that he deemed particularly interesting. When he requested the phone records for January 13th, the staff readily offered them up. Upon reviewing the documents, he identified a number with a 305 area code associated with Palm Beach, Florida, and he was pretty sure that it belonged to Jim Sullivan, and it did. This discovery deepened the investigation into Jim Sullivan's possible involvement in Lita Sullivan's murder.
We know you're not there sitting surprised, right? Special Agent Kingston examined the registration records and noted a significant entry. A check-in time of 5:18 p.m. from one of the 3 cars retrieved. The individual who registered used the name Johnny Furr, and the records indicated that 3 people had checked into the room. This detail raised suspicions as Kingston believed that 3 individuals could possibly be involved in the murder. Additionally, their vehicle was recorded as a Toyota with North Carolina plates, leading investigators to suspect that this Toyota was likely the getaway car used in Lita's murder. See, this FBI agent, he is doing all his good
I'm talking about
investigation.
He's putting the pieces of the puzzle together, which is very interesting, in a time where you really had to heavily rely on how well people kept records. And it just played out in his favor.
Absolutely. These motel records were dated January 13th, just 3 days before the murder occurred on January 16th. Kingston theorized that the killers might have attempted to reach Lita prior to the actual murder, possibly knocking on her door and regrouping when she did not answer. The registration card would become a focal point for Kingston's investigation over the subsequent months. Kingston's next step was to locate this individual, identified as Johnny Furr, associated with the North Carolina license plate. To his surprise, there were approximately 150 individuals named Johnny Furr in North Carolina. You couldn't have a more common name. Johnny. And then Furr may have narrowed it, but it
just a little bit.
It didn't narrow it all the way. Even more astonishing was the discovery that 115 of these names were concentrated within a small area, specifically in the cities of Albemarle, Concord, and Kannapolis. If I butchered those names, just know that it's with love. Kingston and his team planned to visit each of these residences in search of the correct Johnny Furr. However, as they prepared to knock on the doors, they encountered a setback. They were operating out of Georgia. They required permission from North Carolina authorities to conduct their investigation in that state. Before they received the necessary approval, their supervisor called to inform them that North Carolina had denied their entry, taking jurisdiction over the case. Why are you denying? What is happening? And it's really, what that is. It's like an assertion of power. I want to have power. Don't come in my state. I got this. Instead of saying, hey, we're willing to aid and assist in any way we can to help you find this suspected killer. Because that's what should be paramount. This development severely hindered Kingston's investigation, and shortly thereafter, he was transferred to another assignment, which really sucks because he was doing his good work. He was doing his good investigation. Consequently, the investigation into Lita Sullivan's murder became obscure.
Following Lita Sullivan's murder, Jim Sullivan and Suki began to enjoy a lavish lifestyle in Palm Beach, unencumbered by Lita's presence. Just 8 months after Lita's death, Jim married Suki, and they frequented high-end restaurants and social events. However, their seemingly idyllic life took a turn when Jim was involved in a minor accident while driving his Rolls Royce and had to appear in traffic court. Y'all get this. In court, Jim argued with the judge, stating, "You've misunderstood. I wasn't even driving that day. Suki was driving." The judge, believing his assertion, was inclined to dismiss the case. However, the responding officer later reported to court that Suki was not in the car that day and confirmed that Jim was driving alone. Jim's claim constituted perjury, leading to his eventual conviction. He received a sentence of 1 year probation and a year of home confinement. Because, Jim, why was it so hard to just take that traffic ticket and pay it?
Because, Jim, you're a millionaire. What is even happening here?
I did not understand. When I got to this part of the case, I was like, oh, what?
Because you blamed it on somebody else.
But it happened to be God's work. Really,
it really
truly
was.
It did.
Absolutely.
Suki also was charged with perjury for her role in the case. Like Jim, she was given a similar probationary sentence. Alarmed by the charges and other things going on in their marriage, Suki decided she could no longer stay with Jim and filed for divorce. The divorce trial became the talk of the town, filled with sensational testimony and scandal, while Jim contested the divorce because that's what Jim's going to do every time. He's always going to contest it.
Absolutely, because you're not going to get my money.
No, not my money. Suki's courtroom revelations took a shocking turn when she took the stand. She testified that Jim had confessed to her that he was responsible for hiring someone to kill Lita, a bombshell revelation that reignited interest in Lita's murder investigation. Like I said, God's work. However, despite the explosive nature of her testimony regarding the murder, the divorce judgment ultimately went into Jim's favor. Shortly after the divorce proceedings, a significant break occurred in the investigation into Lita's murder when the FBI, Atlanta Police, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation executed a search warrant at Jim's Palm Beach mansion. As a convicted felon, Jim was prohibited from possessing firearms. Yet investigators discovered multiple guns in the house. This violation of his probation led to Jim being sentenced to 9 months in jail.
During this turbulent time, a federal grand jury convened in Atlanta, sifting through the evidence collected from Jim's mansion, phone records, and testimony from Sullivan and neighbors. However, a critical challenge loomed. The federal government faced a 5-year statute of limitation that would expire on January 16, 1992. With just 5 or 6 days left before the deadline, the U.S. attorney made the bold decision to present all gathered evidence in court. Jim Sullivan faced indictment on multiple counts for allegedly orchestrating the murder of his estranged wife, Lita Sullivan. Now, I'm not sure if these statute of limitations still exist in Georgia, if this is old, but I know that here in the state of Texas, there is no statute of limitations on murder. So you may have gotten away with it for 20 years, 30, 40. We can still convict you.
We're coming for you.
We are coming for you. And I'm glad that they were able to come for him before the statute of limitations ran out. But he was indicted on multiple counts for allegedly orchestrating the murder of his estranged wife, Lita Sullivan, through the murder for hire scheme that involved interstate phone calls. The trial captivated the Atlanta media, which reported daily what was going on. However, cameras were prohibited due to the federal court restrictions. Lita's family hoped for accountability in her murder, with the prosecution indicting that the killers had called Sullivan from a rest stop to inform him that the job was completed. Conversely, the defense argued against this assertion. Sullivan retained a highly reputable team of criminal defense attorneys, so he spared no expense. Finally, he spared no expense, considered among the best both in Atlanta and nationally. At that stage of the trial, there was no definitive evidence about the phone call or whether it had been made by anyone associated with the crime. Over the span of 2 weeks, prosecutors presented their narrative, detailing events that occurred months after Lita's death and delivering some of the most gripping testimony the jury had encountered. However, a significant twist occurred when Judge Marvin Shoup announced that he was compelled to dismiss the case due to insufficient evidence. So that you guys can understand, at any point during the trial, specifically during the prosecution's case in chief, right, a judge can decide, especially after the prosecution rests, that they're going to dismiss the case because there is no evidence. Right? You know, we rest. The defense is not even going to argue because there is no evidence. There's a lack of evidence here. You know, we want the judge to just rule on the merits that there is insufficient evidence. As a matter of law, there is insufficient evidence. A judge is always going to be the one, as a matter of law, determine that there's not enough evidence for a case to go forward or proceed. And that's even in the beginning stages, even before a case goes to trial. Whereas the jury is ruling on as a matter of fact. They're determining the issues of fact in a case. A judge cannot decide fact issues unless we've asked to not have a trial by jury. If we want a trial by judge, then the judge can determine fact issues. But if we want a trial by jury, which most people want in criminal cases, then the judge is going to be just the one that says, okay, as a matter of law, these things are right or wrong, or there's no evidence, right? They'll rule on objections and they will rule on things that are a matter of law. That's what this judge did. He basically said, listen, there is not enough evidence for this case to proceed. And so therefore, I'm going to dismiss this case on the merits that there is not enough evidence. This shocking decision abrupted the trial and ended in Jim being a free man.
Lita's family was devastated, feeling down. Nevertheless, they pursued a wrongful death lawsuit in Palm Beach, Florida, where they secured a verdict against Sullivan. The jury found him liable for wrongful death, awarding Lita's estate $4 million in damages. The battle for justice was far from over. Jim Sullivan appealed the civil judgment against him, arguing that the lawsuit had been filed after the Florida statute of limitations had expired. Once again, he managed to evade accountability, leaving Lita's family in disbelief and despair over the latest setback. 11 years passed since Lita Sullivan was tragically killed at her doorstep when a tip unexpectedly emerged from a small town 700 miles away. A call came from an attorney in Beaumont, Texas, who had a receptionist named Belinda Trahan. Belinda shared an unusual story about her boyfriend, Tony Harwood, a long-distance truck driver from North American Van Lines. She recounted a time when Tony returned from a trucking trip and claimed that a wealthy white man in Florida offered him money to take care of his black wife in Georgia. Initially, Belinda dismissed the story, thinking Tony was simply trying to cover up his infidelities. He just wanted to go down to Atlanta to be in the strip clubs and cheat.
So instead of you just acknowledging that you cheated, you're going to cop to murder.
However, her doubts faded when Tony took her to meet this man in a diner where he received a significant sum of money as a part of arrangement for the hit.
After this bizarre encounter, Belinda ended her relationship with Tony and moved to Texas. However, 11 years later, because, she didn't think, after I ended this relationship, I'm going to now call the police. She waited 11 whole years. 11 years later, Tony reached out to her again, which prompted fear that he might harm her. This new tip from Belinda prompted Georgia authorities to intensify their investigation into the cold case. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent John Lang was assigned to the case, and he traveled to Texas to interview Belinda about her prior meetings with Tony. To gather more information, they showed her a lineup of photographs. Belinda pointed directly at Jim Sullivan's picture, declaring, "This is the man." To further aid in the investigation, Belinda was encouraged to reconnect with Tony. We need you to just tie this thing up in a bow and get Tony to confess. And so she reconnected with Tony, and Agent Lang listened into these conversations. Now, during these conversations, Tony provided details that placed him at the scene of the murder on the day that it occurred. Agents sought to follow the evidence trail and contacted North American Van Lines to inquire about any records they may have from that time. After some persistence, Agent Lang located old documents stored in the company's attic. Among these files, he was astonished to find Jim Sullivan's name and address alongside Tony Harwood's signature, linking both men together just 2 months before Lita's murder. Now, on April 1st, 1998, Agent Lang and local authorities approached Tony's residence in Albemarle, North Carolina. When Tony answered the door, he famously remarked, "I've been waiting for you boys for a long time." He knew.
He did. I often see in cases like this where years have gone by, the person who is the perpetrator always says that. They always say, this has been in the back of my mind. And it's like almost a sense of relief. Like,
absolutely. Like, I've been carrying this. I've been always looking over my shoulder thinking that this day will come. Oh, it's here. I'm just glad it's over. Right. So I don't have to worry about this anymore. He insisted he did not pull the trigger. His admission during the interrogation was incriminating. As the investigation progressed, authorities faced an urgent challenge to issue an arrest warrant for Jim Sullivan, who had become aware of the developing situation and subsequently vanished. Investigators believed he might be hiding out of the country, leading a concerted international manhunt.
In 1998, Sullivan fled to Costa Rica and purchased a home there. However, after an arrest warrant was issued for him, Sullivan quickly moved on to Panama, followed by ventures to Venezuela and finally Thailand. U.S. authorities placed him on the FBI's most wanted list, and they placed him on the top 10 most wanted list. In late 1999, Lita's devastated family received uplifting news. A court's decision reinstated a $4 million judgment against Jim Sullivan related to the wrongful death lawsuit filed by Lita's estate. Despite this victory in civil courts, Sullivan had successfully hidden his wealth, thwarting their attempts to collect any damages. Fast forward to 2002, Jim Sullivan remained elusive, prompting law enforcement to utilize all available resources to locate him. Despite the heightened awareness surrounding his case, including features on programs such as America's Most Wanted, he remained untraceable until a tip came in that led to his capture in Thailand in July of 2002.
Upon his extradition back to Atlanta in 2004, Jim Sullivan was met with a renewed wave of legal scrutiny. The prosecution appointed a robust legal team to ensure that this time, they would secure a conviction. In March 2006, Jim Sullivan finally faced trial for the murder of his wife. The courtroom was filled with emotions as Lita's family hoped for justice after 2 decades of turmoil. The prosecution, led by prominent figures such as Clint Rucker and Sheila Ross, presented a strong case built on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of key witnesses. Despite the significant challenges posed by Jim's well-resourced defense team, the jury deliberated for only a few hours, thank God, before returning a verdict of guilty for malice murder. The judge sentenced Sullivan to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This moment brought a profound sense of relief for Lita's family, to finally have the closure and the justice that they had long fought for. And they fought for years. In the years that followed, Tony Harwood served a 20-year sentence for his role in the crime, and he was released in 2018. Jim, on the other hand, remains incarcerated, which is a great reminder of the cruel choices that led to the tragic end of Lita Sullivan's life and the heartache that she endured by those who loved her.
Take away. The case of Lita McClinton is one that resonates deeply within our community, Black community especially, embodying the essence of Black excellence and the triumphs we celebrate. Born to politically aware and affluent parents in Atlanta, Lita appeared to have the world at her fingertips, enjoying the best that life had to offer. She was the cream of the crop, a shining star in her family's legacy. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, there are profound lessons to be gleaned from Lita's story. One of the most vital is the unwavering steadfastness it takes to seek justice, no matter the odds. Her journey also serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder to be vigilant of early warning signs in relationships, those red flags that can signal deeper issues lurking beneath. Parents often impart wisdom, urging caution and awareness. Lita's story exemplifies why heeding that advice is so crucial. Lessons of vigilance, yet beyond the lessons of vigilance and resilience, I choose to focus on the stark reality of violence that affects us all. It does not discriminate based on social status or privilege. Rather, it stealthily weaves itself through the fabric of our lives, seeking a vessel to exploit, like Jim Sullivan. Jim Sullivan, an affluent white man, may have believed that his money and status would shield him from accountability for taking the life of a Black woman. But this case proved that good can prevail, that justice is possible even in the face of deep-seated inequalities. Lita's story continues to be told today, not just as a tale of tragedy, but as a powerful reminder for us all. It urges us to reflect on our choices, to learn from our missteps, and to embody the resilience she displayed despite the many obstacles she faced. In honoring Lita McClinton, we're reminded that we have a role to play in fostering a safe, more just world where every life is valued and protected. Make sure you share this story if you care with your friends and family, or leave us a 5-star review. We want to thank everybody who listened to our episode on Oxygen. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did not catch it, I will put a link where Oxygen has the episode up. It is episode 3. And MD, I'll let you give a shout out for your birthday because you had a lot of people who said happy birthday.
Thank you so much for thinking of me on my birthday. I had a great day. It was relaxing and, just a time of reflection and moving into a new season.
Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.